Good evening and welcome to the 14th presentation of Avalanche Canada's 2021-22 webinar series. So glad to have you folks joining us tonight. My name is Brent Strand and I'm going to be your producer for the evening. We have Nancy Geismar, who's also online. She's going to be the moderator and adding links into the chat box tonight. We hope you've been having a great season out in the backcountry this year. Avalanche Canada's mission is to educate backcountry users so you can play safe in the mountains throughout the winter. And we want you all to know more, go farther, and come home. First, we'd like to acknowledge that our session is being hosted in the territory of the four nations, the Sinnix, the Secwepemc, Ktunaxa, and the Silks. As a national organization, we also acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit nations whose lands we live and recreate on. First off, we'd like to thank our sponsors. Avalanche Canada is a nonprofit organization. We're very thankful for our sponsors for being loyal in their financial support for us during these challenging economic times and working with us to reach new backcountry users this winter. We have government partners, we have our program partners that help support our programs. We also have our premier sponsors, supporting sponsors, and our contributors that help us along our way. This webinar tonight is sponsored by Mamoot. Mamoot has been one of our sponsors since the inception in 2004. And we're thrilled with their ongoing commitment to avalanche safety. You'll probably have noticed when you got your registration confirmation and reminders for this seminar that Mamoot is giving all attendees a discount code for Mamoot products. Nancy's going to populate that in the chat box, so go there if you want to click on that. Go and get yourself some good swag. Hope you folks stick around for the full presentation. So just a couple housekeeping notes. First off, we always appreciate any support from folks being a nonprofit organizations. We do have good sponsorship, but every little dollar counts to help these programs. With our Zoom attendees tonight, all you folks are automatically muted. You do not have any access to your webcams. If you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. You can have a good conversation, a verbal question with the panelists and the presenters tonight. Otherwise, you can just type your questions into the Q&A box. And please keep them to the Q&A box. It's way easier for us to track those questions in that box. And then the chat box, that's going to be used to populate for web links and resource links for online stuff. So tonight's presentation is the daily mindset. We've got a special group of panelists tonight, a bunch of experienced avalanche professionals who will be engaging in a discussion around mindset. Our moderator, Grant Helgeson, will quickly introduce the idea of mindset. And then we'll discuss how those professionals use that mindset in their work and how to incorporate the mindset into your next day in the backcountry to make sure you and your crew are on the same page. Grant Helgeson, he's a senior forecaster with Avalanche Canada. He brings a wealth of experience. He's been a forecaster for 14 years in both Canada and the US, and he's been pursuing his own winter backcountry adventures on a snowmobile and skis for over 20 years. Joining Grant tonight, we got our panelists, we got pro athletes, Holly Walker, Patty Jerome, and Nadine Overwater. Holly Walker, though Holly has been born in Vancouver, BC, to a family of skiers and mountain lovers in Canada's West Coast, she was swept away at the young age of 10 to a vagabond lifestyle around the world, finally settling and grounding back in good old Squamish. Holly now guides in the Coast Range and shares the new appreciation for the mountains and beaches she grew up with. She's an ACMG apprentice ski guide in Whistler and the Sea to Sky Corridor, as well as a professional member of the Canadian Avalanche Association. When she's not working, it can only be guessed what remote mountain range Holly is exploring, or ski and climbing expeditions in the Alps, Himalayas, Pamirs, and beyond. Holly is a member of the Mamoot Ambassador Team. Patty Jerome. Patty is also a member of the Mamoot Ambassador Team. He's been a professional ACMG guide for 22 years, and he's a professional member of the Canadian Avalanche Association. Patty runs his own guiding and instructing business, Can Rock Mountain Guides out of Canmore, Alberta, where he lives with his partner, Kate, and dogs, Ayla and Zelda. He guides and instructs all types of mountain pursuits from mountaineering, rock and ice climbing, and recreation avalanche courses. And then we have Nadine Overwater. Nadine started out on a snowmobile at the age of 7, has never looked back. She's gotten into serious mountain sledding in 2007 and has been guiding in the Revelstoke area since 2010. She spends lots of time on her machine riding with all different skill levels and pursuing professional level avalanche training. In 2012, Nadine started La Nina Sled Camp, a venue for women riders to build confidence in a positive environment away from the stress of having to keep up with their partners. Nadine hopes to continue influencing and educating other women to get out there and shred as often as they like. So I'd like to welcome you all, and hope you're going to enjoy tonight's show. I'd like to pass along to Grant now, and I hope you really enjoy tonight's presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Brent, and welcome, everyone. I think we have just south of 50 folks on the call here. So let's get into it. We are going to move over here and share. Okay. Happy to have everyone on board here. Have you got that, Brent?
All good.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, psyched to have everyone on board here. Thanks to Holly, Patty, and Nadine for coming on and talking about this stuff. This is something that's really cool. And I was first introduced to this idea at the 2014 ISSW, along with, I think, probably many of the people on the call. And it was this interesting presentation, Yin, Yang, and You, by a guy named Roger Atkins. And he's really coined the strategic mindset. We're going to go through this pretty quick. This is by no means a comprehensive coverage of what strategic mindset is. But we're going to kind of talk about what it means at the broadest levels and give you an idea of how you can bring it into your own practice. And honestly, I think it's one of the coolest things and one of the most important tools that I use in a communication foundation with the people that I head into the backcountry with at work and in my day-to-day pleasure skiing and sledding. So what is it? Like, what is strategic mindset? Before we get there, I'm just going to, there we go. I want to ask a few questions of you folks. First, I'm curious, what's your training? Have you taken an AST course? Have you taken an industry course? Are you an avalanche professional who's coming here to kick these ideas around? I'm just curious who we're talking to here this evening. So it looks like results are coming in. We got lots of AST1s, lots of AST2, a few pros. Okay, awesome. So a lot of people, over half have taken an AST1. That's awesome. 5 folks who have taken an AST2, and then a few pros in the audience as well. It's very cool. So next, I'm kind of curious how you travel in the mountains. What your story is. Are you sledding? Are you a climber? Are you a skier? Are you a split boarder? We were just chatting about our Vancouver Island conditions with our field team, and they said that the best way to travel today was with cleated running shoes, which is never a good sign if you're a powder skier. That was the first time I thought about packing cleated running shoes. Great, so vast majority of us are skiers, a few sledders and snow bikers, snowshoer, and 1 lone ice climber. Awesome. And then just finally, I'm curious what your exposure to mindset has been. Have you explored this idea? Perhaps you've listened to Roger's Avalanche Hour podcast, or you've read Colin Zacharias's articles on the powder cloud. Just curious how much exposure you've had to this idea. This is a brand new thing that just kind of piqued you when you saw the listing for the webinar, or if you're a strategic mindset aficionado and maybe you've come up with some of your own mindsets that you use with your crew. Okay, so about half of 10 of people have heard of it, and the other 20 have not. And that's just fine. This is going to be a great introduction to that. So thanks very much for that. So what is mindset? Well, the American Heritage Dictionary says that's a fixed mental attitude or disposition that predetermines a person's response to and interpretations of situations. So what does that mean? I kind of like the second definition a little bit better, and that's just, it's an inclination or a habit. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means to myself and then get into it with our panel. But I really like what Shelley Carson, who's a brain researcher at Harvard, says. She says, when we change our mindset, we actually change the way we see the world. And I think that this is one of the really neat things about mindset. It's just primarily it's a communication tool amongst your team about how are you going to behave in the train today. So you're looking around at avalanche train, you're saying, that's in, that's out. Today we can go for it, or today we're going to be very mellow and we're going to avoid all convex rollers. Today we're going to completely avoid avalanche train. It just gives you a lexicon or a series of phrasings that you can use to have a clear communication with your partners. So it's a lot like a run list, and that's part of this whole thing. So as I was speaking to, it's primarily a communication tool. It sets the what are we going to do in the train today? How are we going to behave in that train? It can help you create a go, no-go list of train features. So in a professional setting, that's going to be something like a run list. And so I think that some of us have this heroic notion that when we're going heli skiing, the guys just get out there and maybe smoke a hand-rolled cigarette and say that they're just going to go to this one place today and they'll figure it out. But that's actually not how it works. Every morning when the guests are just getting up, the guides get up in the morning and they're looking through their mindset. They're discussing what's happened with snowpack, weather, avalanche information. And then they were saying before they even head into the train, what runs are in and what runs are out, red and green. And I think as recreationists, is something we can really emulate. It's deciding what kind of day are we going to plan today. It's not going out there and trying to figure it out when you're already in the field. There's too many variables and there's too much happening out there. And a lot of things can get in the way, like desire. But it just really simplifies the decision making. And this all happens before that you head out the door. So when you head out the door with a mindset, you stick to it. And it's not so simple that it can just be red and green lists. You can just say, well, that we decided that train was good to go today, so we just go out there and do whatever we want. No, not at all, because even in green terrain, there can be potentially critical train features. And we must decide if we're going to go around those to stop and go to the side, or we're just going to ride right over it. The mindset really helps us understand how we're going to behave in the train once we've actually selected the things that we think are good to go for the day. So the strategic mindset is really born out of a professional setting where people are in the similar or same terrain every day, and they're professional guides. And so that's been translated a little bit back to this idea of train mindset. And both Roger and Colin Zacharias have done some really interesting writing about this, but how do recreationists use a train mindset and what are the differences? I'd really recommend that you go to the Powder Cloud and check out Colin Zacharias has written a series of articles, and I bet we can throw those up in the chat for you. I believe it's number 4 that has to deal with train mindset, and it has some really cool graphics that you can actually turn things on and off. You get an idea about what kind of train's in, what kind of train's out based on a given day. And it's just a beautiful and really well-written article that I encourage you to check out. And that's where I've borrowed a lot of these ideas from in this quick presentation I'm doing here. But there's essentially 4 things. There's 4 different mindsets. Check it out, keep it mellow, step it up, and time it early. And I bet just by reading out those titles, you probably get a pretty good idea of what we're talking about. So check it out means that you just choose a zone that offers several options to eliminate exposure to avalanche terrain. So you're skiing low angle stuff and primarily forested terrain. Check it out just means you're really not going to go into avalanche terrain. You're going to try and stay away from it. And this is, that kind of classic high hazard mentality. So it's storming, that there may be natural avalanches in progress, and you really just want to go to places where you're really almost eliminating your exposure to avalanche terrain. Then there's keep it mellow. And keeping it mellow is just you select a zone or a valley or drainage where there's options that exist to reduce your exposure. And then you're moving through that terrain very carefully. So that's, when we're into things like in broad brushstrokes, things like considerable. Like there's probably a terrain that you can go access. There's probably avalanche terrain that you can go and have a great day in. But you're going to have to be very careful with how you manage individual terrain features such as convex rollers or unsupported slopes or cliff bands or thin rocky areas. And then on the other side of the risk spectrum is the step it up. And right away, I'm sure you get that. It's time to consider the bigger options mindfully during periods when human and natural trigger avalanches are neither expected nor reported. It's been a bit of a step it up time for the last little bit here. We have not seen a lot of deep persistent slab activity. It's been bluebird. So hopefully a few of you had a chance to get out and get after it over the last week here, because we're about to enter back into a time where it's probably going more towards keep it mellow and check it out. But this next thing is something we're kind of flirting with right now as we get into meteorological spring, and it's timing it early. So that just means you need to be out the door when the travel hazard is low. So there's kind of 2 principal things where that works. One, in the spring, when we start getting into an isothermal snowpack, that just means one temperature, or when we start to getting into that corn cycle, you want to get out and be climbing on things when that snow is hard and frozen, and then the hazard is very low. And then just it starts to soften, you want to be headed down. And, this is the kind of thing where you're kind of like up at maybe 1, 2, 3 in the morning, getting on top of things, seeing first light just as you crest into the alpine, being on top of something quite early. And then just as it starts to soften, you get ready to drop into your line. And that can be a really incredible time, especially in places like the Rockies, to go out there and get things done. So you can step it up and then also be timing it early at the same time. So that's a broad brushstroke of what these things are. So where do we do this? Now, this is the daily process, and I'm sure that many of you have taken your AST recently. You're probably familiar with this, and this is part of the strategy that we advocate at Avalanche Canada. So when do you adopt a train mindset? Well, it's right when you're planning your trip. And then we can start choosing what kind of features are in, what kind of features are out. But then you're also using that mindset throughout the day when you're evaluating slopes, when you're using good travel habits. And then again, at the end of the day, you can also use your mindset to say, like, did we choose the right mindset today? Were we a little bit too ambitious? Were we a little bit too cautious? And then you can go back the next day and make a new choice, because every day is a new mindset. This is from Colin's Powder Cloud article, and it kind of talks about the flow here. So you get the backcountry forecast, you discuss the risk factors, that's everyone talking together. And then you adopt a trained mindset that's going to help you understand what you're going to do today. Is it time to step it up, or maybe is it time to keep it mellow? Then you start selecting your route and agree on the slopes to avoid, review your emergency plan, you can be out the door. That's planning in a nutshell. I really like this idea, because I think this is what I find a lot is the difference between professionals and recreationists is that professionals have a pretty comprehensive understanding of what's happening out there, and they've got a plan A, B, and C for the day. And sometimes as a recreationist, I'm certainly earlier in my 20s and probably most of my early 30s too, it's like I would have these big dreams of skiing big lines, and I would always try and read the conditions in a way that would allow me to get into that terrain. I had so much desire as a ski mountaineer to kind of get out there and get after it. And I love this quote. It was a stupid idea. I mean, it was a good idea, but it was the wrong day. And so I think in that planning process, looking at the conditions, discussing with your group what the hazard is, you can make terrain appropriate decisions. And mindset is a great way to communicate how you're going to behave in that terrain. So I'm going to leave it here, and we're going to turn it over to our panelists. And we're going to start a little bit of a discussion that I really would like you folks to be a part of. I've got the chat queued up. I've got the Q&A queued up here. And I'm really hoping that you folks can start being part of this dialogue and ask these really experienced people from around the avalanche industry. We've got, alpinists, skiers, sledders here. I kind of fit into all those buckets. So I will start to get us started a little bit. And I see Nancy's also got the Q&A, or excuse me, she's got the Collins articles there, which is great. And so welcome, Holly, Patty, Nadine. Just moving some windows around here. I'm hoping that someone can talk about, maybe we can each kind of talk about a little bit about desire in the mountains and what that means for us as people who have spent our lives pursuing that. I'm curious to hear how you choose a mindset to communicate what the plan for the day is, and how you choose when it's time to get out there and get after it, when it's that kind of step it up time.
Who wants to take this one?
I think we should all speak on it. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's interesting because, like, just to start the discussion in that we're choosing a mindset, and I remember we all have to like dial back to our recreational days when we were not really even thinking about mindset. And basically we were coming in with a mindset, right? And that is kind of that desire. That's all we wanted. We wanted the powder and the steep stuff. And, you have to sort of overcome that bias a little bit, put it to the side. As you get more training, then you sit down and realize that you do already have this mindset where your goals are quite large, and sometimes you need to be able to dial that back. And if we're thinking about like terrain mindset, then we have to see what we're doing on a daily basis, what the weather is doing, what the avalanche forecast is doing, all the other information, and then we're now just recognizing that we are creating a new mindset before we step out into the mountains.
Yeah, I think that's well put, Nadine. It's easy to take a mindset that just kind of dominates your whole life. And I think that at earlier times it was like, I'm here to shred. My identity is based on skiing big lines. And I see Holly nodding along there. And Holly, can you talk a little bit about going from being a recreationist, like being someone who's a world traveler and skier, to now teaching this stuff, being in the professional realm? Like, how do you communicate mindset with the people that you're headed out with for a day?
I try to keep my terminology super simple in the sense that it's not going for a big objective anymore or reaching the summit. It's actually, how am I going to have a fun day and make it to après? So already my end goal, being safe at my car, is in my mindset. I definitely, you know, want to get out of the car and start my day and try to go wherever I'm going to go to. But I always want to guarantee that my plan is to get home safely. So if I'm entering into that bigger terrain and conditions aren't right, even though I forecasted it to be correct, but maybe the wind has picked up and now new wind slab has developed, and I've got to now change my mindset from stepping out to, whoa, I'm stepping way back. I'm just always keeping in mind, like, how am I going to get back to my car? How am I having that après at the end of the day? So having that end goal in mind versus being so drawn and set on, like, I've got to reach the summit, because I always say it's only halfway.
You're muted there, Grant, but I love how you're very motivated by snacks like I am. It's a girl thing.
I think that's an everything thing. I think that, like, yeah, stashing beers and fizzy waters in the truck is always part of my mentality. You know, I think for myself, like, it's embarrassing for me at 39 to even speak about it. But when I was in my early 20s, I felt that I recognized the risk of skiing bold lines around North America. And I felt that death was actually an acceptable outcome to me. And it's embarrassing to say that now. Like, I remember having a discussion with my mom talking about, like, you know, like, if I pass while doing one of these things, like, I'm doing what I loved. And I've come a long ways from there, and that didn't last for too long. But I wonder, you know, that was a time when après was not the most important thing to me. Now, like, skiing and sledding, you know, hippie trees is pretty much my jam. But I wonder, like, Patty, I mean, you're an accomplished alpinist. You've climbed in the big mountains, like, and some of the premier ranges in your backyard. How did you come into mindset? Like, did you have a young person's dreams at one point where you felt like you had to go out there and slay the dragons and prove yourself?
Yeah, for a period of time, but I mean, I was so immersed in pursuing guiding and becoming an avalanche professional that you know, I kind of got exposed to the mindset concept from Roger Aitkins there right around the same time you did. I was at the 2014 ISSW as well, but it took a while before it began to actually get integrated into operations. But going back to your question, as far as I would say that I was well immersed in like my work and working it towards being completing my guide certification and being an avalanche professional. By that point, I was just my motivations for doing big climbs was probably starting to kind of get put on the back burner, and I was focused more on trying to be a pro, you know. So that's where it's at for me.
Yeah, well said. And so when you think about, you know, recreationists out there and working with these ideas of mindset and these, I really like to stick with Colin's like 4 distilled mindsets out there. When you're talking about setting up a day, can you walk us through a little bit about how you're planning? Like, what does a typical morning look like for you when you know you're going to meet? Let's start with just like colleagues or friends. You're going out for a friend, pick your activity and speak to that. And like, walk me through what happens from when you get up to when you get out the door, and how you're sharing your ideas about planning, how you're making sure everyone's on the same path, a mindset.
Is this for me, Grant?
Yeah, please.
Oh,
if you
sure.
carry on there.
Yeah, no sweat. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, it starts with looking at the day, like what are the weather factors? What are the weather inputs that are expected for the next day? So I typically kind of go back a little bit and have a look at the weather forecast, then the weather actuals. If there was a wind concern, I might go back into the weather actuals, like the weather stations, and just have a look a little bit further back just to kind of see if there's any significant wind effect there that leading up to the time affecting my objective. And then, yeah, getting right into the the avalanche forecast. I mean, Avalanche Canada, like checking the regional bulletin is obviously the centerpiece of quality information. So reading through that thoroughly and making sure I understand the nature of the avalanche problems, where they're going to be found in the terrain, what's the, you know, the sensitivity to triggering, the destructive magnitude of the avalanches that are expected. So, you know, not just sort of perusing the color codes and getting like a hazard rating, you know, color code or number or word descriptor, but delving a little bit deeper into it, into the snowpack, you know, the snowpack discussion, the weather, and then just kind of looking at a number of different weather forecasts just to kind of make some comparison. And then once I've looked at that, I mean, it kind of starts a little bit earlier than that. It's like, first of all, partner selection is really important. Like making sure you're choosing a partner that you know well and you're on the same page with. That's a really important piece to having success in the mountains. Like if you're choosing partners last minute or people you're unfamiliar with, especially in times when the avalanche hazard is heightened and you're probably, you know, it may work out, but it also may not work out very well for you. So that partner selection is a really key piece. And then, so once you've kind of got that and you've done all your homework, then you can just start using the strategic mindset as a place to start talking about as a community. As you mentioned earlier, Grant, is like, that's a key communication tool. Like where should we be? Like, so you start asking yourself where you're at and then talk to your partner or partners. And it's like, okay, well, where's everybody at with this? And then you start talking back and forth and eventually you come to some sort of reasonable consensus. Like if you've got a solid climbing partner, or you've got backcountry ski touring partners that you're familiar with, that should generally come fairly easily, you know, with a little bit of discussion. Ideally the night before, not, you know, on the skin track, but the night before, or at least like early in the morning, meeting in a coffee shop or something to that effect, so that you're not getting surprised.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, please go ahead. No, Nadine, build on that.
I was just, you know, Patty brought up a really interesting, you know, thing that I feel like that I'm encountering a lot now with my group of friends, because when you find that you're in the professional side of your sport or your world, you find that you have the highest level of training. So when you're riding or skiing or snowboarding or climbing or doing whatever you're doing with your peer friend group that generally have a lower level of training, I find a lot of them really just look to you for the answer, you know, and this is like, it's not up to you, it's up to the group. And, you know, your strategic mindset for the day should be, just like Patty said, based on a group comfort level and a group decision making. And yeah, I just thought that was a good, you know, chatting point, where it's kind of like it always gets diverted to that higher level of training, or that person that may or may not be in the mountains more. But you know, with variable conditions, which we've had a lot this year, and like really kind of isolated problems, it's very different if you're even riding in the Selkirks versus the Monashees, or just one range away. So it's super important to have those conversations, and even just see where everyone's at, because it's kind of like how you see it. It's your perception that is your mindset, really.
Yeah, and I think you both touched on an interesting point here too. But go ahead, Holly. Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to feed off of Nadine really quick and just come into the group think versus the critical think. And, you know, she said having an open conversation, but making sure that you keep it open. At everyone's ability level is different, but everyone has viable thought processes. And someone with less experience may notice something critical that someone with more experience may just be overworked and tired that day. And so just having that open conversation and not falling into that group think of just, oh, well, we'll just follow along as a group and we don't want to say anything because we just want to be an easy group for the day. But no, it's keep that conversation rolling from the beginning of the day all the way to the end of the day.
Yeah, and like, again, feeding off you, Holly, like, it's not always the snowpack factors and weather factors that are actually like driving your decisions. It's sometimes like the fight you had with your partner last night, or the fact that your car broke down in the morning and you're just like, "Ugh," you know, just plowing up the skin track. And like, you know, it's not all about avalanche factors all the time and in your perception of things. So
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's been some really interesting discussion from all three of you about the idea of partner selection. Like, who do you go out with? And maybe the partner selection kind of coincides with choosing a train mindset for the day. I mean, if it's hairy and we're expecting natural avalanches, or it's considerable and it's a really tricky thing to manage, it's probably not the best time to be out with someone that you're brand new with. I kind of, when I'm going to like date a new partner out there in the mountains, I like to actually set the whole day up for a win. So, I might be looking at a time when it's like a step it up kind of mindset day where we can get away with more, and I can learn about how they like to be in the mountains, how they travel in the mountains. So maybe kind of setting yourself an extra margin of safety around times when it's less hazardous out there. That could be a good time to go out with new people, versus like when it's touchy and you're gonna have to really tiptoe around and just trying to avoid avalanche terrain. Like, you want to know that you can really trust those people at that time.
Absolutely.
I think that we're probably all of an age where we probably didn't find our ski touring partners on social media, but that's changed now. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your process for, you meet someone new, you catch a vibe with them, and you're like, we should go touring, we should go out in the mountains together. How do you feel that person out? How do you introduce the idea of mindset in those kind of new partner type times?
I guess I could jump in. Well, I'm a mountain guide, so I'm with new people all the time, and so I'm used to being in a role of responsibility and duty of care. So it's pretty natural for me. But when I get out of when I come home from work and I go ski touring or go ice climbing or whatever, I try to keep the dialogue. Like, if I'm going out with newer people who I haven't ski toured with, I'm comfortable with that. But generally speaking, like, I like to know a little bit about them. I don't want to get into a situation where I'm having to sort of take over. Like, so again, like, a lot of it is like picking the right partners for the right conditions and the right kind of hazard level. But generally, I want to know a little bit about who I'm going out with. I think it's also like another piece of this is you have to be really careful with like getting too many people in a group when things, because the human dynamics, like the complexity increases when you have large groups. So, it's okay to go ski touring with a group of 4, 5, or 6, but just keep in mind that the human dynamic factor can really add a lot of complexity to the decision making, and so it's worth keeping in mind. Keeping those group numbers down when things are getting a little bit tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that resonates with me for sure. And I think that I mean, it seems like these days I kind of ski with like the same 4 or 5 people, and they're all guides and pro skiers. I feel like we've got it pretty made. That's just being a long-term part of the community. But I think that, yeah, choosing people for the right days, that makes a lot of sense to me. What would you say to the folks, like, just like a word of advice, like a friendly bit of neighborly advice? Maybe Holly, you can answer this one. To folks who you see, they just met on South Coast touring, like they've never actually met each other in person, and they're gonna go to the Hurley and they want to ski Face Mountain. Like, what would you recommend? What's the pre-trip planning? What should those folks do before they head out the door?
Yeah, obviously, before an objective as big as Face, I'd love to see them go for a walk in the park, because if they can't figure out their schedule to actually meet on that random Tuesday to go on a stroll, they're already not communicating well. and they're not coming to an agreement. And, you know, if you can't handle a simple meeting, even just for whether it's a beer, or I'd actually just say walk in the park, because that's more random for folks. It's like, if you can't handle a simple task like that, how are you going to be traveling up the Hurley without cell phone reception, up a big face mountain for the whole day without that simple, like, knowing what block each other lives on? And obviously, once you're on that walk, you can talk about risk tolerance, talk about, you know, whether you ski at the same ability. And that's the next point. I'd actually go ski the resort together. I'd go up Spanky's ladder and make sure that you can both shred down Diamond Bowl, because if one person can't, you don't want to find out after hours of snowmobiling and slogging up a big face that one person doesn't have the ability to ski down it. That's just a hazard waiting to happen without avalanche or the risk of, you know, any accident, as far as like, what am I trying to say? Yeah, like any hazards as far as rockfall and whatnot. But just if someone fell on a face like that, that's huge. So yeah, definitely not recommended. You should already have a relationship. Lots of dog walks, lots of skiing the resort, lots of simple backcountry tours on oboe first.
I love that answer. Yeah, warming it up into these things and like seeing where these things take us, getting a good feel for who you're going to be out in the mountains with. And I think that it's snowmobiling even adds a whole other mix to it too, because like you can get so far so quickly. And I also feel like as sledders, we almost have a more of a propensity to just like meet people there. You know, when you're on a groomed access road, there's just natural regroup points. And I got to be totally honest, I try and bypass them for the most part now. Like when I see a big group of people, I try to keep going. Not because I don't want to interact, just because like I want to be able to, I want to know who's in my group, and I don't really want people adding on at the last second, because the people in my group, we know we have a mindset for the day. We know what we're going to go try and do. And sometimes when you get the random tag on, it can be, it's just a whole liability. So I like the idea of warming up into these things, establishing a relationship, getting to know that person as a person, you know, like how, or I love all of my closest friends, so I know exactly who they are when they're tired and grumpy and need some sugar. Like that's part of the deal, is you really to know those people you're going to hang out in the mountains with. And I find this idea of mindset, like with those people that I do know, it just sets the tone of the day. It's like, are we getting after it today? Is there anything else to worry about? Like, no, I think we can step it up. Like, let's go out there and do it. And there's all sorts of different ways, colloquial ways to say that too. There's been a few good questions. I like this one from, I'm going to butcher everyone's names. I apologize, but Sean Concolics. Sean asks, do you have any hard and fast rules to manage a situation where maybe one person or a minority of the group wants to make a more conservative decision, but the rest would like to continue into more complex terrain? As in, I always default to what the most conservative person wants rule or something like that. How can you comment on how you manage that kind of situation? Nadine, I see you nodding along there. Do you want to take that one?
I love this question, because I even brought this up to you guys last night. I get asked this all the time. Like, people want to know what like the key things are that get me from, in this case, keeping it mellow to stepping out, you know? And like, what's that thing that you're looking for where you're confident in doing that? And, you know, and there's never an answer. And that's what sucks about science, is it's like always depends, right? But, you know, a lot of it with sledding, well, I mean, most of our audience here is skiers and snowboarders, but it's all about testing the slopes and testing the terrain you're riding as you're moving through it. So sled Nadine can test so much more terrain than splitboard Nadine can, right? But still, you're collecting all that data and you're seeing other groups ride different slopes, and you're just using all this knowledge through the day. And at some point, and there's not one thing that ever puts me on the other side of that tipping point. But at some point, you know, you make a decision to step out, and usually it's related to what I'm seeing, because usually in that situation you're going out with more of like a keeping it mellow terrain mindset. And once you start collecting the data getting enough beta, hazards aren't increasing, you're not seeing winds, you're not seeing avalanche observations, then you're comfortable to slowly step into that. And it's true, everyone always defaults, because we're taught this, we're defaulting to go with the most conservative decision, and that voice always needs to be heard, and that's very true. But sometimes, you have a few friends that are very conservative decision makers, and so sometimes when you feel in your gut that you're able to step out a little bit, then you just do it in steps. You don't hit the big slope right away, you hit a smaller slope representative of what you want to go for.
Yeah, I really like that. I want to build on that a little bit, Nadine, because I think that, I've been on both sides of that. I've been on the side of like getting ready, teeing up a bigger line for the day and then just not feeling good about it, and actually having a tough time articulating why I don't feel good about it, even though we thought things are good to go, but kind of spidey senses are up. And I've also, I'm sure many people have been on the other side of it, where it's like, oh my God, I really wanted to do this thing, and I felt like we were all saying that we were good to go today, and then someone doesn't want to do it. And I think that a lot of that really has to come back to, like, you have to be so in sync with the desires of the people you're going out with. And Patty and I were discussing this a little bit earlier today. Like, and it kind of makes us selfish, because, there's only so many days that we can go climbing or ski touring or sledding. And it's like, if someone's shutting down the day, like, I think if that's your day, you probably have to shut it down at that point, because you're out there with those people, you've made that choice. But it might affect how I go out with those people the next day if we have a very different way of, or if we have just different desires of what we want to do in the mountains. No, Patty, can you speak to a little bit, talking about like desire? I would encourage you to speak about this with your peers, like from a perspective of your peers, like fellow guides, when you guys are out on a day off, like how do you communicate what your desire is for the day, and like how do you get what you want to get done, but also please your friends? I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I think the biggest, the whole, like the original question that you got there from the member of the public was a really good question. But I think like that is actually where, obviously if you're in a group of people, like the person that is the most conservative, that's feeling a little bit apprehensive about completing the objective, we should ideally we should default to the person, like give that person the power of veto. But I think like if we adopt the daily mindset, the strategic mindset, whatever you want to call it, it's kind of a way of like taking that almost that little bit out of the equation. Like it kind of prevents that problem from arising in the first place. So for me, like when I go out with different friends, ski touring or climbing or whatever, like I kind of like, I have a certain like groups of friends that I go out and do stuff with. And some friends is like, their approach to train is aggressive when they're like, even guides, like I know some guides are pretty aggressive, like with how they use the train when they're, in most their time off, so for me, it's like, you kind of have to know what you're getting yourself into before you commit to going with that person, right? Like if you know that person is like, their general approach to the train is fairly aggressive, then you kind of have to feel good about the conditions and being with that person, and also being like strong enough to communicate your concerns. And if there's something where it's like, we're kind of getting to the edge of the line here, and it's like, once we'll go past this line, there's no turning back, then you gotta make sure that that you're able to make your voice heard, because sometimes sometimes we go with people that have like really powerful personalities, and it's easy to kind of get to just sort of go along with it because they've got a larger than life personality. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's, yeah. And then I've also got friends as well that are really conservative, and generally I'm actually fine with, some days I'm completely fine with that. And the conditions actually almost make the decision making easy.
Totally. Not every day is the day to go into tiger country. And it's like a lot of days you just want to go and keep it mellow.
Yeah.
Especially for myself, like coming off of long field trips, that kind of thing, like I'm psyched to go to the mountains, but I don't want to have to go make a bunch of complex decisions. So I might just take the keep it mellow mindset I know that that's the tone for the day, and I can go out and can just ski with my friends without having to feel like we're on the bleeding edge of what's possible for the day. So I think that, yeah, choosing those days and those objectives and those different groups of friends for different mindsets and different things or objectives is a powerful idea. How does, maybe we can speak a little bit about, the idea around mindset is that we pick it in the morning. And if we go out there, if we say we're keeping it mellow, for instance, that's our mindset for the day. And then we get out into the field and we find like, actually things are better than we thought they were. It's like, I think that one of the rules, or one of the things we try and abide by with mindset, with this idea, is that we actually don't step it up then, that we don't switch our mindset halfway through the day. And there's this kind of idea that we give it 24 hours. We say, well, let's head back out tomorrow and we can reevaluate our mindset in the morning. Has that ever happened to you, any of you, where you've chosen the wrong mindset for the day? And I'm curious about kind of what you did as a result of that. Maybe you thought it was better than it was conditions wise, or it was actually quite a bit more unstable. You were seeing natural avalanches. Like I'd love to hear, Holly, maybe you could talk about a time where you chose the wrong mindset heading out the door, and then what you did with that as you how you manage that as you work through your day.
This may be answering your question backwards, a different scenario. The poop chutes avalanche that occurred on Blackcomb a couple of years ago. I, left the house that morning reading the forecast. The weather, everything was low in the avalanche forecast, and the winds were pretty calm, and there was nothing going on. And I got out into the field out in Circle Lake in the Blackcomb backcountry, and the winds were just howling. And there was so much snow transport that my plans for the day were just shut down. I just turned to my friend and I said, hey, do you want to go to town and have a latte? And she said, that sounds awesome. And so we just ski toured out Body Bag Bowl, and I got to the coffee shop and I started getting a lot of text messages from other friends asking if I was in these avalanche accidents that had occurred that day. And it's difficult because, we do the forecasting in the morning and we compile all this information, but we have to still be able to do a nowcast when we're in the field and reevaluate the scenario, whether we need to step it back, or if we're choosing to step it out a little bit more. I'm okay with that, but we should always have the option to step it back and to change what we thought the forecast was, because it is just that. It's a forecast and it's a prediction, but what we're seeing in real time, that's what's actually happening. And so being able to adapt to that, I think, is obviously super important.
Yeah, 100%. Patty, I think we were talking earlier and you were talking about the idea of having a timeout in the day to reassess. Could you just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so like just as very similar to what Holly just spoke about there. I've certainly been in instances where, similar, where you go out, you've got a theory of what you think you're going to see out there in terms of hazard. You've chosen a mindset, and you've done some terrain coding for where you're going to go ski that day, and all of a sudden, you get out there, and all of a sudden it's like, well, this is not what we were expecting, and this is getting, things are starting to get pretty electric, and it's, and it might just be that what typically happens in the professional setting is, guides start talking, people start seeing things happen. It gets communicated on the radio. There's a discussion. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, this is the run list that I have in front of me here. And now we're going to start reading. We're just going to start taking some things off the list. And it's almost like just kind of stopping and having like a hard reboot, and just like almost redoing the whole hazard analysis. And not like you're doing the whole run list over again, but maybe there's some runs that that were green that day, or perhaps were yellow. And you're just like, ooh, that is completely off the radar. Given what we're seeing, given the inputs that are affecting the avalanche hazard. Yeah, that's happened to me on more than one occasion for sure over the years.
Yeah, it's a fairly common thing. Nadine, you're in the train a lot, and I see things on social media, like you doing bombing runs. And I think that, amongst my friend group, and they're all pretty good sledders, like you're kind of, I should say you're king of the heap. Like when you're out there and things are starting to go off, what's your mentality? How do you communicate that with the people around you?
Well, it always depends on your group, right? But like listening to you guys, it's really interesting because, you're talking about this like time or these couple times. And I'm like, maybe I'm really bad at my job, because this is like actually a really regular occurrence where things are not what you expected based on your forecast. And, it's one thing if you're a professional that's out there every day and you're seeing in real time what's happening on the snow, versus if you're traveling out for the weekend, big sled trip, big pass trip, whatever you're doing, and you haven't been immersed in the snowpack for the last 2 weeks, or if at all this winter, right? So often you're creating like your mindset from like secondhand material, which is also very valuable. A lot of people are using the bulletins, which is great. But again, it's a regional forecast, so it's not always representative of exactly what you're seeing. So on a daily basis, I am always adjusting, not necessarily my mindset. Usually you'll go out with a mindset, highly dependent who you're with. And then you just easily, I think the more you're in it and the more you do it, the easier it is to dial it back and step it out. You just have to take those minutes, and it's all about group conversations and just talking about what you're seeing and what your comfort level is and what your risk tolerance is as well too, right? So, but it's almost every day, so constant change.
I'm totally with you. It was actually I was in Blue River a few weeks back on a work trip, and it was Bluebird, and we were dealing with a persistent weak layer that was in play and had really been in play, producing avalanches to size 3 the previous weekend. And got out there, and I'm out with one of our new field techs, Paul, and it's this great guy, kind of soft-spoken, really skilled, great avalanche technician. And we're out there, and I'm like, this is really good. And we had conservatively been working the sleds through some trees, managing terrain, and we got to this one piece, and there was a link up that would require like a bit of a side hill above a steep slope. And I was like, but if we could just cross that, then we could get into that whole valley. And Paul said, well, let's just stop and think about it for a second. And it's classic. He smokes cigarettes, so he lights a cigarette, and he's like, if we did that, that would be a bit of a change in mindset, wouldn't it? And I just chuckled to myself, because I think the roles out there that I'm mentoring him, and then he schooled me on that when he's like, yeah, Paul, you're right. That would be a change in mindset. So let's dig a hole here. Let's keep working these trees, and we'll just call it good for the day. But it's just desire can really sneak up on you. You get out there, things are a little bit more stable than you thought they were. And it's like, but I could go there. And I think that, I mean, God, I've been doing this stuff for 20 years and it still gets me as recently as last month. So it takes a lot of discipline to control those things. And it's like, our desires are so interesting. And especially, I think that we're all folks who live in the mountains get to do this a lot. But I think it's more challenging when you live away from the mountains. You only have these small windows that you come out to get things done. So I think this discussion that we're having here about how folks like ourselves are constantly having these days where we actually do scale it back, where we do retreat, where we do see après, I'm going for a latte. Like there's a real time and a place for that. And that happens. I think people think that once you get to be a professional, that you can actually, that happens less, but I think it actually happens more, which is a really interesting idea. How about, I think that the idea of fatigue is one that intrigues me too. Like it's so easy when we're all doing this winter work, which can have some long days built into it. How do you build more margins? Do you choose a different mindset at times when you might be tired, or like you were saying earlier, Nadine, like had an argument with your partner, or there's other things in play? Do you scale back your terrain usage at those times?
Yeah, definitely. And it feeds into a comment you made earlier, where you roll up in the parking lot and you kind of knew that the mindset of the friend group was, you know, this location objective. We're going to sled to here. And you're pretty tired. It's been a long week. And like you roll up and all of a sudden, you know, the dog's sick. So they can only go for a half day. And you're just like, yes, thank God. I didn't want to even go riding today, but it's sunny out and, you know, otherwise I'm going to work. So I forget actually what the question was. I just got off on a tangent.
That's okay. It's that time. But talking about fatigue and maybe how that kind of changes our perception out there, like when you've had a long string of days.
Yeah. And you know, you use a lot of your energy getting there too, right? And I know it's the same for ski touring and it's the same for sledding. When you're trying to break into zones, you use all your energy. And all I'm thinking about, just the other day, we went into like a really, really technical zone. It took hours of side hilling on this crust. And I was exhausted. And all I could think about all day was, holy shit, I have to get back. I'm not going to get back to the trucks today. Like I am sleeping out here. And if anything happens, you know, that's another factor. If someone gets hurt and, you know, it clags in or you have no heli and you have this massive mission to get out, then yeah, sometimes at the end of the day or afternoon, you know, you're pushing like the 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock now before we're starting to get darker. You just want to get back. So you kind of start to rush things a bit, you know? And so.
Yeah, it can really, it sneaks up on us in a big way. I think that's an interesting thing that kind of goes with planning and mindset too. Like, and we don't always do it with our friends. Like, do you folks set turnaround times first thing in the morning when you're with your buddies? Nadine says maybe. Holly, how about you? Do you set a firm turnaround time?
Yeah, I set turnaround times, and especially in the springtime when solar warming and maybe you have a photographer and it's really tempting to stay out there to get those photos. But I've actually had that hard conversation up a big couloir with a group of friends and the sun was just cooked. We can't be here anymore. And they're like, oh, we're almost at the top. We have the photographer all lined up. I'm like, we can't be here anymore. We have to turn around. And it's a hard conversation, especially you're speaking earlier when you have strong-willed folks that have strong opinions. And then, you know, you being the lowest, you know, the veto voice, so to speak. It's a hard discussion when you're halfway up a mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when like that, when you feel like it's just 20 more minutes, that's a really tough time to turn it around. And I think that, you know, we're all speaking to that thing too about, we keep coming back to desire. And I think that we've been speaking a lot this evening about to control the desire, but I think that mindset also works really well on the other side. Like it allows you to set a time when it's game on. Like when it is time to step it up. And that's the thing I like about it. So it's not like we're just always being the avalanche police and saying like, don't go here, don't go there. It's like there are times when it's actually time to go out there and step it up and get after it. And I think that's a good thing to empower with the group too, and choose those special partners that you know you can communicate well with and go out there and get after it. But again, having that idea that like, if you're not quite making it and it's getting warmer quicker than you thought it was, like even though it was a step it out time, there's still moments within the train that you actually have to make a fresh set of decisions. Sean has asked us another question. I think it's a good one. He asks, what are the best steps for getting into the next level of mindset? Been touring for 4 winters, typically ski more moderate terrain and basically only lower moderate avalanche conditions, but would like to start to ramp it up. What are the things that make that transition the smoothest and safest? It's like the code of the mountain person to be so modest. And so we have 2 ACMG guides here, Patty and Holly. And I'll say for you, I think seeking out some guided days can be so powerful because it really allows you to have a fresh set of eyes. And it's like having a counselor. You can just go talk about you and what you want to try and do. Could you talk a little bit about, Patty, maybe you could communicate a little bit about the value of that person who's done their AST1, maybe they've done their AST2, as a few folks on the call here that have been, people who kind of want to figure out when they can step it up, but like what value does that person get when they hire you as a guide?
I think the biggest thing is, you're going out with someone, you got this like person with a huge body of experience. You're kind of fast tracking the learning curve is really, I think, maybe the most concise way of saying it. And then, it certainly doesn't, hiring a guide never guarantees 100% safety. Like that's, if you hire a guide thinking that you're going to have a 100% safe day, or that, that's kind of a delusion. But what you're doing is you're entering into a contract with someone who's gonna that has a duty of care and is going to take you out and show you, like, they're going to ask you what your goals are, and then you're going to try to align the goals with what the realistic conditions are and try to get out and find an objective that's suitable for what's actually going on out there. But I'd say, like, a good guide is going to have a really good process for communicating what they're thinking. I try to do that anyway, like, especially with people that are really keen on that. Like, there's some people that just want to go and do stuff, and they just want to go out there and they don't really care too much about having the conversation. But there's lots of people that do. In fact, I would say the majority of people in, like, North Americans in general are probably more prone to wanting to learn more for themselves. Maybe a little bit more so than other cultures. And so I think, like, having that dialogue, and I think if you can, like, get out with a guide and ask him or her what their thought process is, like what their decision-making process is, how they arriving at those decisions. Cause it can actually be really hard to articulate to people. But if you've got someone that's got a big body of experience, who's very good at, has really good communication skills, you can get a lot out of that day. Like, even just one day can be a huge jump in your learning process.
Yeah, I think, Holly, maybe you could speak to that a little bit too. Are you willing to take on people who you can kind of go tutor out there, kind of like bring them into the fold? Kind of, as Patty's talking about, like that person who, it doesn't just want to be shown a good time, but wants to learn how to do that themselves. Like, is that something that I think that's kind of new school guiding from what I see? Yeah, please talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I myself, and I'm sure Patty's the same, I've started teaching some ski mountaineering courses. So getting people into those bigger objectives, but talking about, when is a safe time to do it. That being said, I actually was that student myself in 2012. The course didn't exist at the time. I just sought out an ACMG guide and I sent them a list of what I wanted to accomplish as far as glacier travel. I wanted to boot up big couloirs, and I wanted to manage the hazards, and I wanted to do it with my good friends. And we came out of with 2 first ascents and with a huge amount of experience. So we were super stoked, super happy to have, paid for that and had that open conversation the whole time with that guide. And so it's pretty incredible to now be pushing that experience forward for people, to encouraging them and allowing them to feel comfortable to move forward and do some of those bigger objectives themselves without me next time. So
yeah, I love that. And we have another person who just commented that they found the AST2 to be super beneficial to learn more of the language in the mountains, as well as learning the tools to evaluate the snowpack, and understanding and identifying avalanche problems with terrain. And I couldn't echo that enough. I mean, I think that out of all the courses I did throughout my early growth and middle growth as a ski mountaineer, I think that the AST2 was probably the most beneficial course I ever did, because actually it's decision making. Like, I think too often folks do an AST1, which is basically how to identify avalanche terrain, and then they think, like, I'll just go do the industry training program. But the ITP1, like the industry program, is just so you can go and learn how to basically be an observer. Like, it doesn't actually teach you that much about making decisions in avalanche terrain. And I see everyone kind of nodding along with me, but I did my AST2 with Cyril Shakopoulos, who
nice.
Cyril's amazing. And it taught me so much about, like, the real crafting of travel plans, how to look at things, what to do when there's decision points, how to regroup. It's like how to actually run a group. So I couldn't say enough good things. I know we've got, I think, about 50 people on the call right now, and I don't know, 30 or 40 of them responded to our what level of training, and like the vast majority are AST1. So I'd really encourage those folks to get into an AST2. And I think what Holly just spoke to is great as well. Like, do an AST2 with the people that you ride with regularly. And I think that, like, Nadine, you're out there hosting riding camps, avalanche education camps. Like, do you have whole crews of people that register with you so they can all kind of make sure they're all up there on the same page? They're all getting out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't teach AST courses, but I think just like a part of our day is just group dynamics and terrain choice and decision making. So it's cool to just stop and have the conversations that they're kind of thinking in their head, but aren't spitting out their mouths. And then, you know, it spurs that hopefully in their future rides together.
Yeah. Get out there and do more learning with a professional. It'll pay big dividends. I think that's, to answer that question, that's really how you do it. You get out there, you get some good mentorship. Because I think good mentorship can be hard to come by too. Like, I think that you have to, don't be afraid to pay for it. It's like, it's hard to find someone who's really going to take you under their wing. But I think that story that Holly just shared with us about like being on the other side of it, like, you know, 10 years ago, being psyched, wanting to go out there and get after it. She went out there, hired a guide. Like, they actually, it sounds like you actually communicated mindsets about that too. You said, like, here's what I want out of this relationship. I want to learn how to go and do this thing for real. You and your crew went out there, you did it for real. You got some first ascents, and you probably felt very empowered after that experience. So I think that's super cool. We're just going to kind of head into the last 10 minutes of this here. Did you have something there, Holly?
No, that was, yeah.
Is there anything that when, as we've moved through this discussion, or you've kind of thought about through the day, that you think is maybe some, we'll give one more opportunity for folks to put their hand up or ask a question. You know, we did actually have one hand up for a minute. Does that person still have their hand up? Brent?
That would just be a mistaken twitchy button.
Mistaken. Yeah, no problem.
You get one every time.
If you've got another question, like, just flag it in the next minute or so there. Let's talk a little bit about spring and the time at early mindset, because we're coming into that time. Gosh, in Revelstoke, I've all but given up on there ever being like any kind of corn cycle here. I've been here for 12 or 13 winters now, and it seems like that's the corn season that never comes. But the coast and the Rockies do have a bigger season like that. When we're talking about mindset, and we're talking about getting after it, getting up early, is there any caveats to that? Let's maybe start with Patty, and then we'll move to Holly. Like, how do you approach that getting up and getting after it mentality, and what are the times you need to take that time out?
Sorry, the time, what do you mean, Grant, the time to take it out? Like,
well, when we have the get after it and get up early thing, like,
yeah.
So you've set that mindset for the day, you know, you're doing like the full dawn patrol, you're skinning or approaching the climb with a headlamp on. When do you start to think like, oh, maybe we need to get off this thing? Or contrary to that too, I know one thing that I've experienced in the spring is like being, and in the Coast Range for that matter too, being up high on something, and like you're at the summit and it's not softening, but you know down low that it is softening in a hurry. And so you're trying to find this weird balance. Maybe just a little bit of like, what are some things that folks need to keep in mind if they're getting up on objectives really early so they can have success and get home for après?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I think like, you know, that you were talking about how it can be really hard on top, and then you're thinking, oh yeah, it's going to be really soft down low. Well, the opposite can also be true, right? Like, especially for the climbing community, you know, having those weather, like checking the weather forecast as well as the weather actuals, that's going to give you the supporting evidence that your theory or your plan for the day is probably going to be sound, right? Like, if it's, you know, if you have inverted weather, an inverted air mass, especially if you're a climber, like that can spell big trouble. Like the start zone's getting warmed up, or it didn't, or another one is it didn't recover overnight. Like you expect that normally, especially with clear cold nights, we get good radiation cooling and it freezes everything up. Well, if that recovery doesn't take place and you've got an inversion snuck in there that you didn't pick up on when you were doing your weather homework, then that can play a huge, that can have a serious impact on your well-being and you're managing your own risks. So yeah, that's one that kind of jumps out at me right off the bat.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go to avalanche.ca and zoom in on the map, you'll see all the little black weather stations, and that can be a great way to get high elevation weather data. So you get up in the morning, you can check that out, see, like as Patty was just saying, like, was there an overnight recovery? Is it below freezing up high? And there's some nuance to that, but in general, that's a great place to go and look for that information. So, you're getting up at 2 a.m, like get that check, make sure that you actually do see those below freezing temperatures and that things are nice and cold, that it's still as good as you thought it was going to be. Holly, do you have any caveats or any special tips for spring that you use or that people should think about as we start thinking, maybe after the storm cycle, we get into the stepping out and get up early kind of mentality?
No, I mean, Patty definitely touched on pretty much all bases there, but it's just remember that, yeah, it's just start really early sometimes. I did the Icefall Traverse with some clients, and they had flown in and they didn't realize that we were having to start super early. We did 2 a.m. starts and we were done skiing by 10 a.m. every day, and they were confused, like, but we paid money. Why are we stopping skiing? Like, there's a lot of daytime left. And at 11 a.m., size 3 avalanches started coming down, and we said, that's why we've stopped skiing. So yeah, it's just know the weather, know how hot it's going to get, and whether that avalanche cycle has happened yet or not. Just go early.
Yeah, and you make a good point on just how early you have to go. And when we're starting to get into that cycle too, you'll start to see it in the bulletins too. There might be a wet slab problem that comes into the bulletin, or there might be a loose wet problem you start to see creeping in, or we're talking about the effect of warming temperatures. We're talking about the effect of the solar input on slopes. So the bulletin has it there. And I think that one thing that I want to leave people with too, and we'll come to Nadine for some parting words, take that around, is that a lot of times in the bulletin, we're trying to communicate what the appropriate mindset is in that headline. That's really the place where we're trying to give you the bottom line, or like how we think you should, what kind of approach you should have for the day. And to be fair, we don't often name a specific mindset, but if you read between the lines a little bit there, we're saying things like, take it easy out there, seek conservative terrain, or as we have been for the past few days, like we're seeing very few avalanches, like watch for wind slabs in the more extreme alpine features, but otherwise we're not seeing a lot of avalanche terrain. Like it's been, or a lot of avalanche activity, excuse me. It's been a neat step it up time for the last little bit. Nadine, as we start to wrap this up here, is there any stories or anything from that you want to leave us with about mindset, or how important it is, or kind of any parting words that you might have for people who are thinking about using mindset and bringing that into their practice?
Well, I don't have a magic story for you, but what I think is, like, seeing that the majority of our audience is at an AST1, it's just like, introduce this to your daily practice, and you don't have to worry about all like the words that you just learned today or got introduced to you, but just recognize that mindset is a thing, and all it is that morning chat and understanding what you're thinking for the day before you enter your day. So just start using it, and it will grow along with all your other skills. And that's really all I have to add.
Yeah, I love that. Just start using it, because it's not rocket science. Like, it's pick one, go out there and use it. And then at the end of the day, talk about it. Talk about with your group, like, did we choose the right one or not? And then how are we gonna iterate on that for the next day? So yeah, I think that's a great tip. Just start using it. Check out Colin's article. Dig into some of Roger's articles too. Definitely listen to Roger's Avalanche Hour if you're feeling like you really want to nerd out on this. It's one of the early Avalanche Hour podcasts. Patty, anything you want to leave people with as they start to think about bringing mindset into their daily practice?
Yeah, I would say just like, yeah, like just what you were saying there, like going back and looking at these, having a listen to these podcasts and getting it, you know, reading these articles that Colin Z and Roger Akins. Another really good resource, like a book I think is, to me, is a Bible, would be Bruce Kay's Autonomy Mastery, and what's the I'm misquoting it now.
But in Avalanche Terrain, like autonomy.
Anyway, that's an amazing book, and it plays so much into human behavior and dealing with desire, and like even like, and it actually like calls out a lot of us in the professional realm as well. It's like, it's an amazing book, and it's something I refer to just about every season. Like I often will read the Avalanche Handbook, like just the pure technical manual, and then I'll read Bruce Kay's book after, just to kind of get my brain refreshed into the in for my season. But yeah, there's some amazing resources out there. You know, I think like what you were talking about earlier, Grant, you know, the lack of sort of mentorship. There's so many people now in the mountains that are coming to the mountains, and finding someone you can latch onto and learn and mentor from is an increasingly difficult thing, because there's so many new people and so few highly seasoned people that, you know, oftentimes seeking out a course through Avalanche Canada and an Avalanche Canada provider, or finding a guide, like getting those Avalanche skills, but then moving, like, you know, for these people that are wanting to kind of step things up in terms of like, you know, elevating their game, like their mountain skills, start with the Avalanche, get the AST1, get the AST2. And then if you want to go further and get like into the bigger objectives, get those like crevasse rescue skills, those, you know, lowering, rappelling, ski mountaineering skills. And you're going to get that only from a guide. Those are really good ways to fast track the skill set.
Yeah, well said. I was with you about everything except for reading the Avalanche Handbook early season for pleasure. Good Lord, man.
Yeah, it's a thick piece, isn't it?
It is.
It's really good though.
It is. I'm poking fun at it just because it's like, that's like me saying like, I think I'm just gonna go read about fracture dynamics for a little bit just to put myself to sleep. But no, I really do echo everything that you said there, aside from that one thing. And I really do like what you're talking about, Bruce's book there. That resonates a lot. It is a really cool book, and it does call out you know, people at various stages of our careers, and we're kind of all in the middle of it. Yeah, I do really like that one. I also just love Bruce Jumper's book, Staying Alive in Avalanche Terrain. Like, it's just so simple. And I constantly grab it when I'm forecasting, because it's just like, here's this really big complex idea. Like, what would Bruce say about it? And then it's like, oh, there's a distillation of the message in like a single, easy to digest format. I find it could be really effective that way. And I really like what you said there too about like, you know, get an AST1, get an AST2, and then like start building that skill set by hiring a guide to go teach you how to do some crevasse rescue. Like Holly spoke to that earlier about, like, that can be really empowering. Holly, do you have some last minute, or not last minute, but some final thoughts before we wrap up here about you know, anecdotal things from your career, pieces that you think can help people kind of get into that next step, start bringing mindset into their practice?
I actually just have something I want to say. You actually brought it up in your last you know, 2 minutes of talking, was have a debrief. In all these step processes, it's get the forecast, adopt a mindset, make a plan, and go out into the field. But actually come back at the end of the day and sit down with your partners and actually have that conversation with not just what went wrong, but what went right, and what you'd want to do again next time, or how you would have done it differently, or what mindset would you have on a different day. But keep that conversation open and keep it going. And you're going to develop great partners that way, by having that open dialogue.
I totally agree. And that iterative approach, you know, that's something that we have. It's just part of being an Avalanche professional, is that we always have a debrief, and it's so effective. And I think it might be awkward for folks that don't have that usually, but just like bring that into your day. I think my buddy Marty always talks about debrief chips. Marty's big on the debrief chips. It's like, have some chips, have a talk about it. it's yeah, I think the debrief is really important. That can help you understand like where were you most at risk for the day, what decisions went well, what can you improve on for next time, and that's going to really improve those partners that we go out with, improve those relationships, and ultimately lead to just safer and better times in the mountains.
Yeah, another one is like, what did we get away with anything today? Like, is there something, like it's always good to identify the riskiest portion of the day, but asking yourself, especially when you're spending a lot of time in a low validity environment, like a wicked environment, whichever way you want to call it, that's a really important question to ask yourself at the end of the day. And yeah, that reflective process is just absolutely crucial.
Yeah, wicked learning environments. If you want to get into some interesting reading and low validity, what Patty's talking about there, it's just that idea that if you went out there and you were able to ski or ride a slope and nothing happened, like, is that feedback valuable? Like maybe you were inches from tickling a size 3 avalanche, but we just don't get much feedback in the mountains, and that, especially in winter, that can be the really challenging thing. And it's like when you're climbing, you get feedback right away. It's like you're climbing something, you realize that you're in above your head and you end up bailing on it, you end up leaving gear. It's like it speaks to you. When you're out surfing, like you know what, like I'm just getting onto the shortboard, like I think I can go out there, I think I can handle this swell. You get out there and like the ocean will tell you very quickly whether or not you can actually handle this. But we don't get that as much in the winter. It's so easy to go walk up a ridge line and suddenly be on top of some huge line, and you're not going to get any feedback. You might be able to ski it and get away with it, but you might have just gotten away with it. But the backcountry environment that way, especially like if you're accessing the backcountry from a ski hill gate, like all of a sudden you're just in it, and it may not be speaking to you until it's too late. So I think that's we could do a whole webinar on low validity environments and wicked learning environments, but that's a neat place to think about it too. That's been a fun session. It's kind of hard to believe that it's almost 90 minutes that we've been chatting here. It's been great. Huge thanks to Nadine, Patty, and Holly for sharing their time here. Thanks to the 50 or so people that came to chat with us here and share this information and share how to further build our practices. Does anyone have anything else before we turn it over to Brent to wrap us up?
Just a big thank you to everyone.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for putting it all together technically there, Brent, and Nancy and Nancy for her inputs and moderating, and Grant, yeah, huge, really, really well done moderating. These are not easy to do.
Well, right back at you. It's really easy to have a chat with folks like this. It's been really fun. We really appreciate it. So thanks so much. We'll hand it over to Brent to wrap us up.
Awesome. Fantastic, you guys. Thank you so much for having that conversation with us and all our attendees. Patty, Nadine, Holly, and Grant for moderating things and sharing all your wisdom through the webinar tonight. Like it's super beneficial to learn from, experts such as yourself. You folks have, you're out in the backcountry daily with a variety of people, a variety of mindsets, a variety of, risk tolerances and physical capabilities, which I think a lot of the recreationists are dealing with. They just, it's just the beginning of their process to getting more of those experiences under their belt, right? It makes us realize that we can have fun any day of the winter with proper trip planning and utilizing the proper communication amongst our group members and getting those right group members. That seems to be a big key that, when you're out there, it's out there with the right people, because that can make things go south pretty quick sometimes. And it highlights that it's essential to have that framework to use, and that's where we have in our AST programs, that daily process. We're trying to really get that hammered home to folks, and with those 4 mindset options, determining that with your trip planning and prior to heading out gives you a little bit of tools in your kit. One reminder to everybody, thanks for coming, thanks for hanging in there. This has been a great discussion. You folks all get a discount code to Outdoorly. Check that chat box, hit that code. We super appreciate you folks coming out. This has been a great session. This is number 14 of the year. Coming up, we got another one coming up here. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate your interest in avalanche safety. You can support essential programs like these by donating as little as $10. just hit the link in the chat box. Our next and last webinar for the season, March 31st, transitioning to spring. We're going to have Drew Nyland back from our Yukon field team. He's going to share his important tips to consider when heading out in the backcountry when those warmer temperatures of spring show up, because you know they will come eventually. They kind of coming and going lately. Pre-registration is required. So thank you again, everyone, for your time tonight. And thank you to all the panelists, and thanks, Grant and Nancy in the background. Hope you folks have a great rest of your winter. And yeah, enjoy your evening. Apparently, I'm not sharing the right screen, am I?
Are we no longer live?
That's better, you guys. But thank you all for coming out.